name is Bear Siragusa, and you are listening to the Hunting Hound podcast presented by W Hunting Supply. Cool. Well, thanks for coming back on, Becky. It's always fun to talk to you, and you're a popular guest amongst the Dyed in the Wool podcast listeners. The three of them really appreciate you coming on.
Well, I'm just glad there's more than Cleve that wants to listen to me ramble all the time. So,
well, we definitely do. So, yeah, we're last time you were on, we talked a bunch about puppies, and then not long after that, I lost two of my oldest dogs, and not long after that, you lost one of your older dogs, and it seemed appropriate that maybe we sit down and talk about old dogs, because it's tough having old dogs sometimes.
It really is, and at the same time, I know there's people who their situation maybe isn't conducive to keeping all their old dogs, but I think you really miss out on a big, enjoyable chunk of having that dog if you don't get to spend time around them when they're old. They're just so easy and so happy with everything. They get to go along, and that just makes their day. They're low maintenance, and there's just something, as much as I love puppies, most of the time I love puppies, there's something about an old dog that just hits the spot.
I totally agree. I mean, they're effortlessly lovely to have around. They're not chasing trash. If they were going to do something stupid and get themselves killed, they probably would have done it already. They're dependable and predictable, I guess, is part of it too, is that, you can depend on them being slow. They're not going to be the first one to the tree most of the time, but they're such valuable dogs to have around, and it's always blown me away a little bit talking to dog mushers and talking to some houndsmen that, many people see the value, but there's a lot of them that don't, and that always blew me away because they're such valuable. I mean, even if you want to look at it totally cynically, they're such valuable members of the team or the pack. Those old dogs.
Yeah, and even if it's not hunting stuff, even if it's, these puppies we have right now, they're getting to that age where they're a little bit obnoxious and kind of starting to climb the social ladder a little bit. And 9 times out of 10, old dogs are pretty good about getting a point across about rude social behavior amongst the pack and puppies, and teaching them, a middle age or a younger dog's probably going to play in roughhouse or just run off, whatever. But an old dog isn't going to want to be jumped on. They're going to kind of put some manners on a puppy a little bit too, and that just kind of transfers to everything.
Absolutely, yeah. No, absolutely. I don't know. Do you find that you use a lot less time doing a lot of this, a lot of the basic behavioral training? Based on your older dogs? Like, I always found that my old dogs, especially when the pups are real young and are kind of looking at the old dogs and kind of gathering information about what they're doing, I found that, especially with like training lead dogs and things like that I got a lot for free just by having an older dog there that could show the puppy. It saved me a lot of work.
Yeah, there's a fair amount of monkey see, monkey do. That integrates in that. Like, this morning I had everybody running around, and good Lord, I was playing that Garmin tone button like it was an instrument. We've got a storm coming in, and so everybody is just wound for sound, and these youngsters are still figuring out tone means, come find me.
Right.
And so they hear that, and they see the old dogs all spin on a dime and come running back, and so there's certainly some on the job learning that happens with the older dogs and the puppies.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the other thing is that I can trace my lead dogs, all of the lead dogs that I've had over the years. I can trace them all the way back. Sort of, if you look at skills like you look at a family tree, I can trace it from lead dog to lead dog to lead dog to lead dog, all the way back to that very first dog that I got that I taught to be a lead dog by myself. So Yoda taught sub chief taught Blomon taught Hudson taught Hammer and Ferris and Hammer taught Patsy and Waylon and Arlo and Trapper, and it's sort of this long line of skills that can be traced back 26 years. And it's kind of, we build our systems, we build our kennels off of our original dogs, and eventually those guys get old. I think it's kind of one of those things where it kind of boils down to respect in some ways for me. If a dog has been good enough and dependable enough to be on my team until it gets old, I feel like I owe that dog something.
Yeah, I think and I mean, there's some dogs that transition really well, like this H dog that we have here. And we very, very, very rarely get rid of pups or old dogs. That's just, we pretty much keep everything.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a dog that he's ridiculously adaptable. He's probably the dumbest dog I've ever been around as far as just daily stuff.
Okay.
But he doesn't miss a track, and he's a good strike dog, great with puppies. And he was one that a friend was needing a dog to get his pups going.
Mm-hmm.
So he's got kids and all that. So we sent him up there, and the deal was all right. But when it's time for him to retire, he comes home.
Right.
And I picked him up. Those guys were gone when I went to their place, and he's doing that old dog sleep, where they kind of pick their head up when they wake up and they're all sleepy eyed looking at you. And it'd been, I don't know, year and a half or so since he'd seen me, and he just worked his way up, trotted over, tripped me on the way to the truck, because he's in the way all the time. Mm-hmm. He's like Visa. He's everywhere I want to be. Tripped me on the way to the truck, jumped in the dog box, and never skipped a beat. So that's awesome. I think with a lot of dogs, though, that's not necessarily super common. And I think it's pretty tough to take, I don't know, 9, 10, 11 years of habit in what a dog knows, and then just completely throw them for a loop. Really, they got to learn new people, new dogs, new habits, new expectations. It's kind of a tough deal for me anyways.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think that that pack dynamic, if you've got 4 or 5 dogs, I think that's one thing. But, I think when you've got a bunch of them, you end up in a situation where the dogs have to be so versatile in the first place to even function in a pack that big. And, like we always have puppies rolling through here, and, other people's dogs, and, my guys, it's something that they need to be able to function in that setting. They need to be able to function with strange dogs, especially with the, like the Huskies, they're meeting other dogs on the trail constantly. It's not like, we're constantly around large numbers of other dogs and people. So I wonder sometimes if we're setting them up for success in that way, that they are flexible enough, even in their older age, to, I don't know, to be able to take life in stride, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. It definitely depends on what that dog's life has been like up to that point. And like you bringing up that point, that is mind-blowing to me to watch videos of, say, 2 12 dog or whatever amount of dog teams. I mean, within a couple feet of each other, just either pass, go in opposite directions, or go around and just keep on trucking. No, not hardly even looking off to the side to catch a smell of somebody. And it's like, wow, that's That is pretty dang impressive.
It is. It is something that I always loved watching. It's one of those things where it happens constantly, so you definitely have the possibility to kind of get jaded about the whole thing and not notice it. But it's one of those few things for some reason that every time it happened, I would always notice it, and it was always amazing to me that you could take sometimes a combined total of 32 individual dogs and run them past each other without a growl, without a raised lip, without any problems on a 4-foot wide trail is just, it is one of those things that never cease to amaze me.
And I can only imagine the process, what some of the process getting to that point looks like. Good Lord, there's got to be some wrecks. And then you got everybody tied together. So if you do have problems, it can get bad in a hurry.
Yeah. I mean, it does. The times where it's gone bad, it goes epically bad. The major deal is having lead dogs that are willing to do it, because the team takes so much of its cues from those two first dogs. So, and the right of way when it comes to sled dogs is the same as, the sort of American cars. You're on the right hand side, you pass, head on passing is happening on the left, passing is happening on the left. So when we're training puppies and things, we'll put them on the right hand side so that they have an experienced dog. So even if they want to go over and say hi, they've got an experienced dog kind of pushing them over to the side. But yeah, the times where it's not gone well, it's been epically bad. Big vet bills, kind of bad. But thankfully, and part of that's, I think, breeding. We've ended up with a lot of dogs that were aggressive have been taken out of the gene pool. They're not bred on anymore. I had an issue when I first moved here. I had an issue with a Malamute team that kept coming over, and they just zoned in on this one dog, this one little male that I had, and they did it 3 or 4 times, and I started going way out into the snow, and this guy had no control over his dogs whatsoever. And they'd wade out after me, they'd run me down and, or try to. And so they messed him up a couple of times, really bad. It was those dogs that ended his career. And yeah, boy, I was not happy about that.
I bet not. And then once you get a dog that kind of gets in that mindset, that can spread like a cancer. And they're kind of like a guy who walks through a doorway, and every time he walks through a doorway, he gets clocked. He's going to come in swinging at some point.
Right. Yeah. No, exactly.
And I mean, I think the Malamutes can kind of be a little bit of a game of their own too, from what little I've seen of people that run them. I think they're interesting.
They're yeah. I don't like Malamutes, and let me preface that by saying I got my start in the dog mushing world with Malamute, Inuit, Greenland dog crosses. Some great dogs there, but I don't miss the fighting, because those dogs lived to pull, eat, fight, and one other thing, and that was, it's all they cared about.
And they're so big. I mean, there's nothing that's going to stand a chance against them, and nothing's going to getting through that code. Even I had a little squabble out here with one of my males and that husky that I've got, and it wasn't a big deal, but it was kind of humorous afterwards because the hound kept walking around rolling his tongue over his teeth, trying to spit out all the fluff, and he's kind of looking at that dog, spitting it all out. Like, what the heck was that all about?
Why do I have hair in my mouth? Yeah. No, they, there's things to be said about that old type of dog. They were so tough. Just eat crap dog food and they would just go forever. I mean, not fast, but they'd go forever.
They'd get there eventually.
They'd get there eventually. They might drag down a moose on their way there, but
Yeah, they can bring it back.
they
though.
can bring it back. Yeah, no, but it's I don't miss those days. That was stressful. And the Malamutes here aren't any better. And that guy was at that time he was kind of a little bit of a, I don't know, trying to figure out what an adult version of himself was, kind of football or soccer hooligan. Turned dog musher with kind of this macho streak. So the
dogs take after their
owners.
owners.
I mean, he wanted to run a big, huge team of Malamutes because everyone said it was a stupid idea, and he wanted to prove that he was man enough to do it, and ultimately he wasn't. He didn't have control over those dogs, and it took me getting very, very angry with him for him to realize that, he really needed to choose between being welcome on the trails and running those particular dogs. So he switched to Alaskan Huskies and developed a very nice team of Alaskan Huskies.
That's another concept that's kind of interesting to me. Like, you see it on TikTok or Instagram a lot. Obviously, I follow a lot of those people,
Mm-hmm.
so I see it more than, say, most houndsmen are going to see it. But it appears that you almost have like community groomed areas for whether it's full teams or ski joring or bike joring or whatever with the dogs. Whereas, with hounds or something, you're probably not here. You're probably not going to run into anybody else all day,
right?
Let alone have half a dozen people there doing the same thing. And it's just kind of neat to see how the different communities do different things.
Yeah, the everywhere that I've lived and run dogs, there's been a community there that has maintained sections of trail. So we've been able to run, and here in Norway, we can't just run everywhere. A lot of places you're not even allowed to run a snowmobile. So the trails need to be put in by a trail groomer who has only so and so many trails or trips that they can take in the space of a year.
Really?
So, a lot of the trail grooming was done by us with dog team. And, it makes a very tight-knit community, but it also makes it very, very crucial for, despite the fact that community may have 900 dogs in it, that you can't have that one that's going to take chunks out of other dogs as you go by. It just doesn't work. So in some ways, the community is more tight-knit than a lot of the, at least the big game houndsman community, where you don't have the trials, you don't have the things that you're going, the gatherings and things like that necessarily as much as like the beaglers or the coonhound guys do. But ultimately it's one of those deals where the community functions only when everybody is willing to play by the same rules, which occasionally, and I've experienced it myself, those rules are so asinine that it's hard to want to play by them. It's one of those deals where I don't know. We're dog people, and I think that a lot of dog people, especially the people that go out in the mountains with their dogs or out into the woods with their dogs, they kind of want to be alone. Their social skills are maybe not as refined as some other people's of the world.
They're trying to take chunks out of other people when the people walk by.
A little bit, yeah, and that can be a little bit challenging when you're dealing with a community that needs to function. And in some ways, I've watched the dog mushing community kind of implode upon itself. Because the standard hierarchy that's been accepted for, the last however long, it doesn't seem to be applying anymore. So you have these new people coming in without any respect for the old guys. And in a lot of, this is going to be an unpopular opinion, but in a lot of ways, that is legit. Those old guys are not, and not all of them, but, the guys that have been setting the tone are not necessarily the guys that have been doing the best job in terms of dog care, breeding, or, even just PR, public image type stuff. So, at this point, there's a major conflict going on here between the elite competitors over here and the not so elite competitors who, the elite competitors want to be left alone and have taken a very kind of, mind your own business attitude in a day and age where nobody minds their own business anymore. Everything is filmed, everything's put out on social media, and everybody has an opinion about everything. Whereas
and I think it's just,
go ahead.
That's where the insecurities get blown out too. I mean, it's just, and I don't know if you see it more. I don't know. I can make a whole other podcast about that, but maybe because over there, like you said, with everybody kind of being in a group and doing things together, there's more of a like, oh, well, did you see what so-and-so did? Or did you see how their dog handled that? Whereas maybe more in the hound stuff, people already have their minds made up based off what they see on social media to an extent.
Sure.
Or what they've heard, or, oh, well, so-and-so said this, or so-and-so killed this there. It's like, who cares?
Right.
I don't care. I don't have enough time to take care of my own stuff, let alone worry about somebody else's.
Right.
And it's sad, really, because it takes something that people enjoy and turns it into just another competition. For what?
Right.
And it kind of really, I don't know, I don't want to say bastardizes the whole point of what you're doing, but in a way it does.
I think it does. Certainly in the way you're talking about, and people don't need to hear me go on a rant about social media again, but ultimately it is what, to me, it boils down to is, the guys getting, there's only a couple of guys and gals out there that are active on social media that are also really good houndsmen. That may be an unpopular opinion, but it's my observation is that the guys, the people that are using a lot of their time on updating social media, uploading to social media, are not the best houndsmen, the best, or dog mushers for that reason, for that matter. It's the people who don't have the time for that because they're putting that time into their teams, packs, whatever. They're the really good ones. So it gives kind of a skewed view, I think, of what we're actually about, because I think 99% of us are just kind of out there doing our thing. We're not posting everything on Facebook, and I post quite a bit on Facebook in terms of the podcast and things like that. But it's I'm also not putting myself into the category of a particularly good houndsman. I'm doing my best, but I would need to cut a lot of other things out of my life, I think, to get to where I want to be faster than I'm getting there.
And we got to remember too, all it is a manufactured highlight reel.
Right.
No one posts their bad days.
Right.
I mean, I shouldn't say no one, but on average, you're not seeing what's truly going on behind the scenes. And that's not even just social media. I mean, I can't tell, Cleve's dad was a government trapper, and I can't tell you how many stories you hear of these old timers, and it's like, oh, he did this, he did that. And that's not, I'm not saying that his, that's anywhere. I mean, that's not just in that's in any aspect. And it's like, I think it's just human nature. And I just bring that up because he was out here in the area. And so you hear of stuff the old timers did, and then the older old timers did.
Right.
I think it's just been something that's come along well before. I mean, that was what, 25 years before social media? That was before the internet.
Right.
So I mean, I don't think it's something that's necessarily just social media.
No, that's
but
fair.
it certainly has exacerbated it.
No, that's fair.
I think it's just human nature at this point.
Yeah, that's fair. That's true. It's everybody wants to be, what's that old saying? Everyone wants to be stronger than dad. Everybody wants to try and be a little bit better than the people that came before them. And it's a little bit that, getting back to talking about old dogs, that's kind of the beauty of the sport. And it's also the beauty of having old dogs in a pack, is that, you get these youngsters that come in and learn everything that maybe that old dog had to work really hard and sacrifice a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to learn. You get these youngsters that come in and are like, oh, well, Old Red, he's doing that, so I'm just going to copy Old Red. And they get they get really far standing on the shoulders of some very good older dogs. And for each generation, it seems like they get better and better and better for the most part. If your breeding program is decent and things like that, it seems like as the houndsman and the pack gets better, more and more experience, they get better and better. And I think that's a little bit the same in the sport, is that, it's, I don't like the keyboard warriors on social media, but I do think it's important to remember that, it's people on social media are very quick to disrespect the older generation. And I think it's important to remember that we are standing on the shoulders of people who didn't have the access to the information that we had. We're learning from we're learning on a keyboard to avoid mistakes that they had to, in some case, bleed and grieve for the knowledge. And we're getting it for free. So I think that's important to remember too, that the, those old timers, if you put them in the context of today and how things are done today, it would be insane to not use GPS collars. It'd be insane at this point to feed your dogs corn, just nothing but cornbread. But we are still standing on the shoulders of people who had no other option than doing those things. And I don't think that necessarily makes them bad houndsmen. They were figuring all this stuff out that we take for granted.
Yeah, you don't know what you don't know. And like you said, they were so limited in the amount of knowledge that they had. And back then, I mean, yeah, there were guys that didn't want to share information back then. I mean, I don't know. I think every generation probably goes. I think every older generation probably goes, these young kids are just ruining everything. And I think every younger generation goes, them old timers don't know anything. I think that's probably the way it's been since the first generation.
Probably.
But we've definitely shortened the learning curve. And to the better.
It's a double-edged sword, isn't it?
It is. And I saw something the other day that said, I think it was something along the lines of, don't look down on that old timer that's got a plywood dog box in the back and two dogs. He's doing it for a different reason. And it's like, man, how true is that?
That's so true.
When did it stop becoming about the dogs and start becoming about likes and shares and popularity?
Yeah.
And that's, and like you said, the following that, I've that older dog, my second in line that I have, he's not overly social. I mean, we joke around because he'll play with another dog about once every 6 months. It's becoming more frequent now. And we're like, oh my God, do you have a terminal illness? What is wrong with
Right.
you? Like, have you changed your life?
Making up
And
for
I
the
mean, he's
lost
not
time. Yeah.
mean. He's just, I always joked around, we should have named him Sniper because he's always off in the brush by himself.
Hmm.
And for some reason, he doesn't interact with puppies. He just kind of ignores them for the most part. But every puppy is obsessed with him and follows him and just like takes it all in. Cleve jokes around, he's like the sensei, and they just follow him around like, oh, he's the master. And he pretty much ignores him. Every now and then he'll stop and kind of smell him and interact with him, like, all right, are you coming along? But he doesn't really, he's pretty neutral.
Right.
And every single puppy is just obsessed with him. And I'm like, oh, cool, that's a good one to be obsessed with. Keep watching him. But it seems to be one dog that those pups always are drawn to over the years, if you're lucky enough to have that dog into old age.
Yeah. I had
sometimes
that.
that can be a challenge in itself.
Yep, I had that dog. It's yeah. No, it's true, and I think that as you said early on, when you're thinking about these old dogs, I think that I understand why people move them on. I understand why people will, when a dog is not making it to the tree in a reasonable amount of time and is falling out of races and things like that, not giving up. That's not what I'm talking about, but taking a little bit too long to get to the tree. And I can understand why people move those dogs on. You kind of, puppies are so much fun in so many ways. And if nothing else, they represent potential. They represent, potentially a step forward, whereas the older dogs are really just kind of cemented a little bit in the past. But at the same time, I think it's so valuable to have those old dogs, not for exactly the same reason that you're talking about. Is it they do something socially? They add a level of calmness to a pack, because the old dogs are they're the voice of reason in this sort of sea of chaotic young hormonal baloney. And for that, I've always appreciated my old dogs so much. And there have been times where I've gotten into real bad situations where it was my old dogs that saved, a couple of times literally saved my life. And the puppies didn't know how to respond. They didn't know what to do. The younger dogs didn't know what to do. But the adults, they did. My older dogs knew what to do. So I went through the ice and couldn't get out, and was able to hook my arm into the sled. And I had a team of youngsters and then 4 adult dogs all the way in the front. And as they get older and start to learn, they all learn that when you've stopped, when you say, "Are you guys ready?" Then they get ready and you say, "All right, let's go." Then they all slam into their harness in unison. It gets the sled moving. It breaks it free of the ice. Sometimes it'll freeze to where it's sitting and things like that. Puppies will just bounce and slam in their harnesses willy-nilly and, are almost surprised when the sled starts to move. And that's what I had with me. And it took a lot of, I was properly down in the water. At that point, I was fully waterlogged. I'm a big guy anyway. And they needed to pull me and my waterlogged self up out of the water onto the ice. And I said, "Hey, are you guys ready? All right, let's go." And it was those 4 dogs in the front, those 4 old timers, including a 12-year-old lead dog that just dug in and hauled. And it was those 4 that really pulled me out. The puppies eventually were on board with it. But if I'd just been running puppies, I wouldn't have made it out, because they wouldn't have been able to pull me out. So, it's one of those things where speed and intensity and courage and grit, those are all crucial elements of what makes a good hound, a good big game hound, a good hound. But I think sometimes we underestimate the value of just been there, done
Experience.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a certain level of stability that they provide. And at what point do you consider, I don't know, I think each dog has its own threshold of when it's considered older and when you start that maintenance care. I tend to start that maintenance pretty early.
Mm.
And you can get more out of them that way. I mean, you're not going to.
What does that look like when you're talking about
maintenance genetics?
When you're talking about maintenance care, what are you talking about?
Joint supplements, chiropractic stuff, food changes, maybe not letting them, maybe helping them up and off the tailgate, lesser impact type stuff.
Sure.
I don't really have, and don't get me wrong, I mean, my scenario is different than a lot of folks' scenarios. I'm not in a subdivision where I can only have 4 dogs and I have to take them out somewhere to exercise. So I don't really road anymore. We don't really road anymore. We used to quite a bit before we got this place. And it was kind of funny. We'd always rode by this place and see that lot and be like, man, that'd be a cool place to have. And now I'm sitting on it.
Now you're living the dream.
And there's nothing wrong with roading. It's just higher impact than free running. And that takes a toll after a while. You know, if I had my way, I'd have a swimming pool set up with drop harnesses. I don't think there's a better conditioning tool out there than swimming. Yep. It's just a little tough when you live in the desert. So I tend to be more, and I mean, I'm not overboard with it. I'm just more cognizant of, hey, let me lift you off that tailgate, or we have a trailer that has a little step platform that they can hop up on and off of, because things like discs, one of those beagles of mine does have a history of having some disc problems. It's healed up fine from it, but I'm cognizant of it. So I try to not let him jump down.
Sure.
Sometimes it doesn't always go according to plan. He's a little mutinous little thing, but
fling themselves over your shoulder. I've been there.
Yeah, pretty much. It's like pushing a bull backwards because he's so short and stocky. And then I do joint supplements too. I make my own. And I think one of the things you run into with the joint supplements, and I start that when they're pretty young, it's just kind of a maintenance deal.
Okay. Interesting.
It almost be people say, oh, well, I don't see a difference. And it's like, well, okay, you don't see a difference adding motor oil to your truck too until it's too late.
Right.
You want to be preventing those problems. Like that 8-year-old, I just started him on Adequan the other day because he's a bigger dog than I would normally keep. He's probably, I don't know, he's between 60 and 65 pounds. And he's super athletic. He's not clumsy by any means. But I know that he's going to have more wear and tear on his body due to his size and just due to the pounding and all of that. And he's conformationally, he's roach backed. So I'm just trying to get ahead of any problems in his future to try and make him as comfortable for as long as I can and be able to use him as long as I can. I mean, our stance pretty much is if they're willing to go, let them go. Maybe be discerning. I mean, I'm not going to put a 14-year-old dog that's limping through a bunch of cliffs and blowdowns and stuff like that.
Right.
I mean, I'm not going to be a total idiot about it, but I'm also not going to make them rot at home pissed off they're not going either.
Right. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yep, absolutely. You mentioned chiropractor. You have a canine chiropractor deal do some work on your dogs, or is that a skill that you have? What?
So we do. It's more common to have horse chiropractors that also do dog work. There are veterinary chiropractors. And that's kind of a state-dependent legislation as to who can legally do it. But I'll tell you, it saved an old dog of ours. He was, I want to say he was about 8. And he was just not doing well. We figured he had cancer, honestly, over the course of about 2 months. And we'd had him into the vet. I mean, x-rays, blood work. Vet said, no, he was 6. Okay, yeah, he was 6. And the vet said, this dog needs to be retired. And I'm like,
Hmm.
this dog is in his prime, and this is something that has recently started happening. This is not like a progression of arthritis or something.
Right.
I mean, I was prepared to put him down at the vet that day. He was losing hair by the clumps.
Wow.
He would absolutely scream if you tried to pick his head up, because he'd hold his head down, and I'm like, this dog has got to have cancer. There's something going on. Blood work came back good. Vets couldn't figure it out. And just on a whim, I said, you know what? That's how I feel when my discs are bothering me.
Mm-hmm.
So I started looking around for veterinary chiropractors. He went up, got adjusted, and we'd adjust him periodically throughout, once a year, once every 6 months. But that dog was a horrendous tree climber. I mean, come rolling out 30 feet, climb back up, like bad. And he had a pinched nerve in his neck. And I mean, on the way home from that chiropractor, you could hear as he was sleeping, he would just take these huge, deep breaths and exhales like, man, I can finally relax. And that dog lived until he was 13 here, running around.
Wow.
I mean, he was trailing up until the day he died.
Cool.
And I've used it with some other dogs too, and a couple of these mules, and it definitely can help. And it's a muscle thing too. I mean, the muscles move the bones don't move the muscles. So there's certainly an aspect to some massage, or I have a red light therapy pad that I use for injuries.
Okay.
Healing cuts, they're great. Any type of broken bone or sprain, fracture, anything like that, they really help with the healing. But for the most part, I mean, it's not like they're on a schedule of, every 8 weeks they got to go to the chiropractor, but it is certainly a tool for the arsenal.
Sure.
And especially as they get older, it helps. And if you think about it, most of the time they're curled up, or if they're falling out of trees, going through ledges. I mean, those dogs put their bodies through quite a bit.
They do. Yeah. No, it's the sometimes I think it's the mileage more than the age. More than the age. Yeah, I mean, I kind of try to resist the urge to put human emotions on dogs, but at the same time, I still try to be empathetic with what they could potentially be going through. And I feel that gets easier the older I get. And it's not just an experience thing. It's like I can put myself in their shoes a little bit more. It's like, oh, you're so sore today that you can't even get up. I know that feeling. Which when I was 20 years old, it was like that was insane to me. It was like, just suck it up, cupcake. And now it's like, oh, okay, well, let's see what we can do for you. And
for sure, I think that's one thing you see. We had that experience where we had a dog who was, I mean, phenomenal with puppies, and they just loved him. He loved them. He was just perfect. And over the course of a couple of weeks, man, he started getting nasty with puppies, nasty in the dog box. And it was so out of character for him that we were like, what the heck is going on? And that's when I started the joint supplement. And within a month of the joint supplement, he was back to Mr. Lovable, get down, wrestle, and play, where before, if they so much as come close to him looking like they were going to bump into him, I mean, he was all over him. And so in my mind, between that and putting some anti-inflammatories on him on the tough days, it was a pain thing.
Right.
He didn't want to get banged into by these 40-pound dogs. And I can see that. I mean, you've got back problems. You know how it is. If you move wrong, I mean, it feels like someone's pouring lava down your spine.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, and that was a big motivator for me getting out of the Huskies, or stop, transitioning into Hounds, was, hooking them up, having them sort of haul me around, bumping into me, jumping up on me. And even just the bumps, you're holding onto a sled, the bumps and the jerks of holding onto the sled. It was just, with it wasn't often that it was excruciatingly painful, but I was pretty crabby. I was not the person I wanted to be. And it was just because I was constantly hurting. I was just constantly on some degree of pain. And, it affects you mentally. It affects you emotionally. I mean, it affects every aspect of your life. So, I think that's a really smart way to go about it. What you're talking about is, if you've got a dog that just suddenly takes it just comes out of left field with something insane, that dog might be hurting somewhere. The chances that it just woke up and decided, you know what, screw Becky, I'm going to go and mess, that's it. No more Mr. Nice Guy, and just makes a conscious decision to be a dick. That's not how it works with dogs, thankfully.
Yeah, they generally don't wake up and choose violence.
Right.
Maybe insubordination, but not violence.
Insubordination, but not violence. And, if you've got a dog that when another, it's a great place to start looking is, kind of a pain scale. What is it that's causing what is it that made this dog completely change its way of being in a short amount of time? And, there's not a lot of options there. There's the dog can be seriously sick, which is going to be you can pick up on blood tests, have some kind of brain tumor, which is affecting its personality, or be in a lot of pain. Those are really your options. There's not a lot of other things that are going to cause a dog to suddenly, dogs don't do the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde thing.
Yeah, and there's so many, I don't want to say easy ways to rule it out. Like what I'll do, I know that Beagle tends to have trouble with one of his ribs and his neck. So if you stand, with him facing you and you gently take his muzzle and try to bend his head to one side, you're going to feel a lot of resistance. He might bend great to the left and not to the right on the other side. So there's ways you can check that, lifting their shoulders. Sure. A lot of times when they're standing square, you can see it. And if it's something, you might say, wow, that dog's, top of their hip is, I don't know, 1/8 or 1/4 inch further back than the other one. There's that. There's tick-borne illnesses that can make them grouchy and hurting.
Sure.
And if you can get, people say, oh, well, you're not going to out-genetic, you're not going to out-maintain genetics. And that's true to an extent. But we really only have these dogs for not long enough, but let's say 10 to 15 years on average. Yep. If you can maintain another 8 to 10 months, or 8 months to a year and a half, 2 years out of that dog, percentage-wise, that's a pretty significant percentage of the time you get to use that dog.
Absolutely.
And have that dog be comfortable.
Absolutely.
And keeping weight off them as they get older.
Yeah.
It seems like you've got two types of dogs. Dogs that either look like a rack of bones when they get old, or dogs that look like a beluga whale when they get old. And it can be tough to put weight on, and it can be tough to take it off. But man, if you can keep them, if you can keep them in shape, a rolling stone gathers no moss. This H dog we have out here, the older one, God, I could have killed him this summer. Thought I did, actually, over the course of not having a collar on him. He's just retired for the most part. He'll still go lion hunt and stuff, but around the house, he's not trailing rabbits. He's not doing anything. I had introduced that husky, so I was taking everybody for group walks. And here come a group of antelope. And I'm like, all right, this is no big deal. I don't even put a GPS collar on him. He's on the porch, or he's out by the tack shed, or he's just wandering around doing H things. And I hear him start trailing, and I'm like, you got to be kidding me. And this is, it's July. It's super hot. It's like 9 o'clock in the morning. He's headed into an area with no water.
Right.
So I spent all day, most of the night, on the side-by-side trying to find him. And we had to have been within a couple hundred yards of each other, but the sagebrush is so tall, I couldn't see him, and he's 3/4 deaf, so he couldn't hear me. So here I am. I'm just distraught. This dog is going to heat stroke, and I'm just a mess. Cleve is gone. I'm calling him. And the next morning, the neighbors called. He had found some water and stumbled his way up to their haystack. And he had toes swollen up. He couldn't hardly get off the couch for the next 3 to 4 days. I had to pick him up, carry him down the stairs to let him out to use the bathroom. I could have killed him. Yeah. Every once in a while, they get a wild hair.
Oh, that's.
But for the most part, they're so stable and so good. They can help a pack a lot, like you were saying.
Yeah, I think so. And, a dog's going to be a dog. If they can get away with something, they're going to try to get away with it, most of the time. But usually it's going to be something that they have shown you time and time again that they kind of have a tendency to want to do. It's like, I really want to go and run after that deer, but a dog is not going to suddenly be like, hey, I've loved puppies all my life, and I think I'm going to try and kill one just to see how it feels. That's not how it works.
Yeah, they're not having a 3/4 life crisis. Something's going on.
Right. Suddenly waking up with a tattoo that they can't remember how they got in a mohawk. It's like, that's not how it works.
No joke.
Yeah. But, I think another thing that, we've talked about the value of having these older dogs around, but, I just, I don't like, I feel like I owe it to them. Like I feel like I owe them something, when they get old. I'm not talking about every single
same.
dog. There are dogs where, they, the only reason they're still in my kennel when they get old is because every time I tried to rehome them, they did something insane that, bumped them back. That's not necessarily what I'm talking about. But a dog that's lasted 10 years in my kennel and has pulled my butt around on the sled or, worked for me in some way for 10 years, I feel like I owe it to that dog to give it a respectful retirement. I feel like
we're the same.
Yeah. It's one of those deals where, if they've lasted that long, they deserve whatever I can give them to repay the favor. And I think that's what bothers me maybe a little bit. I try not to be very judgmental, but occasionally it does bother me when people bump old dogs out of their packs. If you've got a good home, that's one thing. But, at the same time, it's like you said, not all dogs are going to be super psyched about going from a pack that they've known all their life to suddenly being, a single dog or, living together with chihuahuas. I don't know. I've always felt like I've owed it to the dogs that have managed to get old to, show them a little bit of payback, pay them back a little bit in some way, even though they're obviously not going to look at it that way. It's an ethical thing to me. Where if they've lasted that long,
I think so.
I feel like they deserve it.
I figure we've put, I don't know, 10, 12, 13 years of dog food into them. What's a couple more?
Right.
They're not really in the way. They do make things more complicated in a way. They get in the way. They fall asleep in places they shouldn't. You got to kind of keep an eye out for them when they really get older.
Mm-hmm.
And I've kind of taken the stance too. And like you've said, you try not to put human emotions on them, but you notice too, there's things your old dogs get away with that you'd be fussing at your young dogs for being a jackass about, and you're like, oh, whatever, all right, you've earned it. You can do whatever. They kind of get some slack and leeway.
Right. You've earned the right to roll in that horse turd.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one of the other kindest things you can do too is there's times I've held on to dogs too long, thinking, oh, I can, and it was something where the dog would get better and then he'd have a hard time, he'd have a good week and he'd have a bad week. And sometimes one of the kindest things you can do is, there is no kind death in nature.
Yeah.
I think sometimes the best thing you can do is evaluate their quality of life and not be selfish about making that decision that, all right, it's time for them to go.
Yeah. That's a great point. That is a very, very good point.
It's weird. Like, and because we keep majority of our, we've generally got groups of 4 or 5 dogs that are around the same age.
Mm-hmm.
That was a tongue twister for a minute there. And so oftentimes we're going to lose 3, 4, 5 dogs in rapid succession. And you're going to have 3, 4, 5 puppies. And you're always in this, or at least I am anyways, this weird vibe of like half excitement, half various stages of heartbreak.
Right.
And it's like having a lot of dogs. That's kind of how it is. And I don't know, it's a little weird, I'll be honest, and I don't wanna say that I don't wanna say you get callous to losing the old dogs by any means. Um, I think everybody probably has a way of dealing with it mentally differently,
Mhm.
but like you and I have talked in the past, it's and I mean, yeah, of course, it's losing the dog too, but sometimes it's the last time you do things for that dog that you do every day
Mm.
that really kinda boots you in the guts, like the last time or when you unbuckle that collar and take it off that dog
Yeah.
before you bury it, the last time you clean up that dog's area, the last time you
Yeah.
clean out their dog house or whatever, and that same day, you might be putting a young dog right back in it, and it's like, God, I kind of feel like a slime ball,
Yeah.
but the show's gotta go
Mm.
on.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you're just kinda in this weird state constantly.
It is funny, isn't it? It's this I think it requires a streak of pragmatism and realism to deal with dogs and to make them as big a part of our lives as a lot of houndsmen do. And part of that is going to be loss. A big part of it ultimately is going to be loss. And it's something I said to my wife after we lost these last couple, because they were key. They weren't just any other dogs. They were the two foundation animals of our kennel that we lost on the same day. Um, I said to her, I was like, I wish that somebody had told me when I was getting into dogs how much of it was going to be loss. And she said that, well, now how much of it's going to be loss, and you're still getting in puppies, like you're still bringing in new puppies. So I don't necessarily think it would have made a difference. Was her take on it. But it's one of those things where people find their own coping mechanisms for dealing with loss and dealing with grief. And, people who have the number of animals that we have to deal with it quite a bit. And, I think that I don't think it's ever gotten any easier for me to say goodbye, but it's certainly, I've accepted it as a necessary, I don't even know if I'd call it evil, but, it's the way it is. And
And what a privilege is it to die at old age.
right. Right. And what a privilege it's been for me to, there's been a lot of dogs throughout the years where I was the first person that they saw when they opened their eyes, and I was the last person they laid eyes on before they died of old age. And I've been lucky enough to be in that position where I could be that person for a lot of dogs. It's been an honor. There have been, there have been I have had multiple dogs that I would classify as once in a lifetime dogs. And it sounds like a stupid thing to say, but I think that in most people's lives, they're lucky. They're going to be really, really lucky if they get that one dog that just everything clicked. They could read your mind almost. It's just like you had that connection with that one dog. I've been so lucky that I've had that with, 5 or 6 dogs throughout the years. And, it's one of those deals where it's heartbreaking when they go, but it doesn't change the fact that I feel privileged to have been, if I die today, I'll have experienced more of something than most people will in their entire lives. And something that's worth something. And that kind of a connection with a hound or a dog, I think, is worthwhile. It's worth striving for, and I think it's part of what kind of keeps us in this year after year, and heartbreak after after heartbreak.
Yeah, and I think too, and I'm not judging anybody on this. I am not. It's something that I feel very strongly on personally.
Mm-hmm.
I was, and I saw an example of it at the vet the other day, because apparently that's just my favorite place to hang out the last couple of years, is the
That's where
vet's
you
office.
just chill.
Yeah, pretty much. I should basically be on the payroll at this point. These folks walked in, and you could tell what they were there for. I mean, she's already bawling. He's trying not to. And they had an older basset hound. So, of course, I'm automatically in love,
Right.
And they handed that dog over and walked out the door.
That's rough. That's...
Man, I what a privilege it is to live to old age, especially doing what our dogs do. Obviously, that dog was a pet. I want to be there at the last minute. I want to be the last, I want to be holding that dog or whatever, whatever the case may be, whether it's a traumatic injury that requires a euthanasia, whatever the case may be. I do not want that dog stressed out trying to figure out, well, I'm in this new environment. These are strange people.
Right. Where the heck did they go? Yeah.
Yeah. And I know that's something that some people say, I can't do it. I can't bear that. I don't want to say it's selfish, because I know everybody's different. But I cannot stand the thought of one of my dogs being stressed out at the last minute, knowing that it could have been avoided.
Yeah.
In that, looking for me or looking for something familiar, that just, oof.
Yeah. I get you. And it's, I work as a veterinary nurse, and it's something we see every day. And it's something that I will tell people, I'll take the time to actually talk to them, and they're like, oh, I can't be here. You just need to come out to the car and get the dog. I'll be like, we'll do that if we have to, but I want you to understand what that could be like for your dog. And you don't need to be there when we euthanize it. But if you can manage to come out, or we can come out to you in the car, and we'll sedate, we'll anesthetize the dog. We'll sedate the dog. At least be with him or her, and, be with this dog until she's asleep. And then we can take it. But, we'll of course treat her well. We'll be kind. We'll give, but it's not the same. You've been with this dog's support system its entire life, and now suddenly, in its final moment of needing you there, and they do. I mean, there's no two ways about that. The dog needs you there when that happens, and
they generally know something's up.
They know. Oh, they absolutely know. They absolutely know, and they need you. Then they do. They need you to be there, and we put down dogs where the owners aren't there, and it goes okay. We tell them all the things that a dog should hear before it dies, as it's dying, but it's not the same. And so I agree with you there that it's kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, owing what we owe our older dogs. I think that's a crucial part about what I believe we owe them. And
yeah, I agree with you on that. I lost the female sister of the beagle, of one of the beagles I have now. And it was months of trying to figure out what was going on, in and out of the vets. And she got to the point where it was like, I needed to get into an emergency vet right then and there. And we either had to get it figured out, or or get her put down. And testing wouldn't come back for 5 to 7 days. I was pretty sure I knew what it was. They agreed that's probably what it was. And it was not, oftentimes a medical euthanasia goes pretty seamless, and that was not the case with this one. And I bawled my eyes out from Twin Falls, Idaho, the 120 miles back to my house, because it was pretty traumatic for everybody involved. Right. But I can still look back and sit there and say, man, I was holding her. It wasn't a completely traumatic deal with strangers, and so there is that comfort there, I guess, in a way, and I think it probably helps get some closure too. Oftentimes if we've got old timers and it's a scheduled thing, which, like I've said, how awesome is that's the point they get to versus getting killed by a bear. And don't get me wrong, there's a valor to going out doing what you love too.
Oh, sure.
Had that happen also, as you know.
Yeah.
But if we can plan a day, we'll go out. If they like to swim, we'll take them to the lake. We'll take them for a last hike out in the hills or something if they're able to. They'll get all the snacks and treats they want, and then we go. We'll either meet somewhere out in the hills or bring them to our local vet, who it's not necessarily a super clinicky setting, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with it being clinicky or not. But try and make it a last good day. And I'm to the point now, I would rather let them go a week or a couple weeks too early than a couple days too late.
Yep.
There are worse things than a kind, humane death.
There are. Yeah, absolutely. I've, and that's unfortunately something I see a lot at work as well, is people that have let it go too long because I don't know whether it was false hope, denial. I'm not sure what it was, but
yeah, it's not malicious by any means.
No, it comes from the best possible place, but it's still ugly. Like, it's still, a dog that should have been allowed to die, because a lot of times that's what it boils down to. Is it's not, these dogs they don't need help dying. They need to be allowed to die, because most, a lot of times these dogs are medicated. They've been trying for months and months and months to prolong the inevitable, which is, I understand. I've done it myself. But it does reach a certain point when, you're not keeping the dog alive. You're, warding off death for a little while. To me, there's a difference. And, it's one of those things that I agree with you that it's time. It's one of those other things that I feel like we owe our old dogs, our old hounds, that, to let them go out while, at the end of a good road.
With dignity.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Let them go out while they're still, before they've suffered needlessly for a long period of time.
Yeah, kind of the final end on a good note.
Yeah.
And there are very few dogs who pass in their sleep. Or without some type of traumatic, Cleve was headed out the other day when that old dog had keeled over, and she was already dead when he came out. And he had a client in, so he's like, hey, we got holes pre-dug. A little bit of a wrist slitter there, but you hate doing that. But we've got these holes pre-dug, and thankfully the ground wasn't too awful froze yet, so I went out and took care of her. And as I'm getting dressed to go do it, I'm like, gosh, I hope this doesn't end up looking like there's paddle marks in the snow, and you can see where she struggled or something like that. looks like she tipped over like a 2x4.
Yeah.
And that's like, man, how nice is that? But that is not a common thing.
It's
I mean,
not.
I've only had 2 dogs ever do that.
Same here. 2 dogs, and all of the dogs I've ever had, I've had 2 dogs do that.
And I think too, maybe I don't know, maybe we look at it a little different too, because our dogs are their lifestyle with big game hounds. I mean, whatever, it can be not big game hounds. I mean, accidents happen. Every time you unsnap that lead, you might not get that dog back alive. So there's like this weird, what happens, but I really hope it doesn't.
Right.
Kind of mentality. And there's almost, this is going to sound really weird. After all is said and done, as much heartbreak as there is, there's almost maybe, I don't want to say a sigh of relief by any means, but there's almost a feeling of, okay, that dog's life has been completed and I don't have to stress about something happening to that dog or that dog having a lack of quality of life. Almost like, I don't know, I don't want to say like a full circle closure.
That dog reached the finish line.
Yeah.
And
yeah, that's probably a good way to put it. Yep.
Sad to see them go, but you're happy with the race they had.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. And you're happy that it was, sometimes you're happy with how they went.
Yeah.
And knowing that you're like, okay, nothing bad can happen to that dog now. It's
right.
That's the final chapter, I guess.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah. But I think we're bumming everybody out at this point, which is good. I think it gives, I hope people are thinking a little bit about this because, it is ultimately, it's not something that we talk very much about as dog people, as houndsmen, and it's such a huge part of what we do. And I mean, there are going to be people out there who don't have that kind of connection with their dogs, never have, never will, who, well, as soon as they're not making it to the tree, they're done, they're gone, they're buried. And, there are people like that, and, they're not necessarily going to be, they're not the people who are going to be listening to this particular podcast, put it that way. But, I think that there's a lot of, I saw just based on, I'm writing an article right now about older dogs for Bear Hunting Magazine. And I asked on the podcast's page, hey, share some pictures of your older dogs. And just got an enormous number of replies really, really quickly. And the great thing about it was that not only did people share the pictures of their older dogs, but they were clearly so proud of their older dogs that they shared I got the life stories of more hounds today. And I loved it. It was awesome because those people, they got it. They get it. They appreciated the race. They appreciated the process. They appreciated that life in a way that I think is, if you wanted to boil it down, might not be, I want to say accepted, because it does seem to be more the norm now than it used to be anyway. But, with no concerns about their manhood being called into question, speaking as poetically and affectionately about an old dog. And I like that. I like that so many houndsmen reached out and sent pictures and shared stories about dogs that had no purpose for them anymore. Those dogs were not contributing anything, but there was so much affection and so much pride in what those dogs had accomplished at one point. I loved that. It's one of the nicest moments that I've had as a houndsman in terms of my interacting with other houndsmen was today, and all the people who responded with pictures and stories and things like that. It was just
I did see.
Yeah, it was beautiful.
I did see the post, and you're right. And I mean, the way you put that is really the mark of true confidence. I mean, nothing screams insecurity like saying "I don't care," and like said no one who ever actually didn't care. Ever.
Right. Nothing screams insecurity like bravado.
Honestly. Yeah. And that's in dogs and everything else. I mean, I got a beagle right now that is full of a lot of false confidence. Yeah. He's coming out of it. But boy, oh boy, when the fit hits the shan, he's like, never mind, just kidding.
Right.
There's a lot of people like that too. And yeah, I think that's something. And boy, you want to talk about a wake up to ourselves getting older. Cleve and I were talking the other night. We've only got one dog left that is the last dog that wasn't started with us together.
Oh, wow.
I came in the picture when that dog was God knew I'd be too powerful if I could do math, so I'm not going to try and do that. That's not my strong point. He was younger.
He was younger
than he is now. Yeah. So, but you start looking at it and you're like, I've had how many generations of dogs? Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah.
I'm getting older.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing for us. I mean, how lucky are we to be able to say we're getting older in a way? And I mean, you can spend your life dying, or you can spend it living.
Right.
And there's a whole lot you can do and change. And a lot of these things we talk about really are first world problems.
Mm-hmm. It is.
But that doesn't.
Yep.
I guess it's all subjective, really, and.
Yeah,
a lot of what we said today isn't necessarily just about dogs.
No, it's not necessarily, and it is a first world problem. Yeah. We have the luxury of living a lifestyle that we want to live, and we have the luxury of being able to, sit here and talk about the few things in that lifestyle that make it a little bit hard sometimes. And
I think we tend to lose sight being saturated in it too.
I think so too. But at the same time, I think it's interesting talking to houndsmen who, I don't know a houndsman that hasn't slogged off into snow or brambles or, crap and just gone through hell and high water to get their dogs back, but you talk to them about hardship, they never mention that. That's not what they talk about. They don't talk about the time that they, half drowned falling through a den to the bottom of a canyon, the time that a bear ran over the top of them and tore them open. They don't talk about that. They talk about that dog that they lost that one time, which just goes to show ultimately how much these dogs mean to us, is that, we're, as houndsmen, I think we sort of inflict quite a bit of hardship on ourselves voluntarily. And losing the dogs is still the thing that it seems like sort of universally, at least for the type of houndsman that I like to even talk to, is, the hardest part, the hardship that is, sits with you for a while, I think.
Yeah, we might tend to be a little bit of sadomasochistic type.
I think we are.
But there's a lot of joy that comes with that too. And if you don't have the hard times, you don't recognize the good times, and everything's a season. And the season of old dogs, man, there's few things that bring me as much joy as seeing an old dog enjoy something so simple, laying on a saddle blanket out in the sunshine. And just, when they start dreaming and they're kind of half open and in their sleep and their legs are going, and it's like, man, which hunt are they dreaming about, or what are they doing? And I don't know, maybe it's the kind of same simplistic joy that we get with puppies too.
I think so.
There's just a little more of a tinge of sadness there.
It's a good way to put it. Yep. It's a good way to put it.
But I just feel lucky to be along on the ride. Maybe not some days.
Oh, I mean,
but most days.
There are definitely days where I think, this doesn't. Yeah. Definitely.
Was I dropped on my head repeatedly as a child?
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's like, what does this say about me and my level of intelligence that I am out here doing this right now? I've definitely had those moments, but luckily the moments of awe and wonder have outweighed the moments of the hell am I doing right now?
Honestly. And in the meantime, this whole podcast probably just boosted Zoloft and every other antidepressants stock.
Probably. If you weren't depressed when we started talking, you are now.
But I guess there's something almost, I don't know, this is going to sound romanticized, but there's something almost a little poetic about it in a way too. It's, I don't know, about like reading a good book or something. Yep. And I often wonder if you could go back and look at your first old dog or your first puppy. Like if you could almost watch your progression and your pack's progression from an outside stance, like all condensed into one mini movie or something. Sure. How proud would people be of themselves? And I don't mean that in a did your dog turn out in spite of you? Or a, would you want to be your own dog?
Sure.
I mean that in a, how far would people look and say, I forgot I didn't know that.
Right.
Or, man, I did that and that was so dumb, but I know better now.
Right.
And at what point do we pass that stuff on too? Like,
right.
Hey, learn from my mistakes. Don't do that because I was a moron and I did that and the world doesn't need more morons. Right. So maybe try this instead.
Right. It's
I've made plenty of mistakes.
Slowly transitioning into our own old dog years, where it's like,
honestly, well, and boy,
I did that and it hurt, so maybe don't do that.
And it doesn't take long. Time drags by in the blink of an eye.
Oh man,
I look back now, and I turned 30 this year, and I'm like, oh my god, I'm halfway to 60.
You're still a pup. You're still a pup. Plenty of experience. I'm not gonna.
And
no offense, but you're still a pup.
Oh, I've got plenty to learn if I can get it through my dense head. That's for sure. 8 or 10 times I'm making the same mistake, right. And I might figure something out.
That's right. It'll eventually sink in. Now it is.
Hopefully.
Time does go by so fast, and I'm a youngster too. I'm 36. It's just one of those things. Like I'm 36, but I ran sled dogs for 26 years.
So that actually makes you like 96 physically.
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure. It's the I always chuckle to myself whenever I watch the Indiana Jones movies. When she's like, "What's the matter with you?" He's like, she's like, "Are you getting old?" He's like, "It's not the age, honey. It's the mileage." That's always makes me chuckle because, boy, that ended up being the truth.
Oh, man.
I hobble around. I've got a nice walking stick coming to me in the mail from Root and Branch USA, Adam Dean. Super excited about it. I'm not going to lie. Because that might mean that I stumble a little bit less in the forests out there. It's like that old knee that's been bothering me when it rains. Yeah, that cane's going to be nice. That walking stick's going to be awfully nice.
Yeah, it turns out that's an actual thing. Yeah. It's not just old timers that say that.
Who knew?
Yesterday I was throwing some expletives towards Garmin in the sky yesterday and Cleve last week because that beagle Huey of mine, and God, the day he goes, don't talk to me for a few years. I'm gonna be a mess. But he is extremely collar wise, and I've been having some troubles with my collars turning off. It was 1.5 miles the other day for Cleve to get him, and he's the type where if he doesn't make eye contact, it's all good.
Mhm.
So he will just kind of look at you out of the corner of his eye and stay about 15 feet ahead of you. And he generally knows if you're walking out to him and he hasn't been toned in a while, he knows.
Mhm.
That little son of a gun. And he is to the point where, and I mean, I went under the barbed wire fence. I was running, and I do not run. If I'm running, something's chasing me. You better be running
Right.
too. And he was, the only way I caught him where I did was because I had made a mile loop around, and he was in some tall sagebrush, and he couldn't see me coming. And I'm telling you, and usually you know how it is. All the dogs go with you, so them other dogs come in, and he moves off. I Olympic sprinted through that sagebrush and tackled him because he didn't have the chance to see me coming. I felt like a lion tackling a deer or something. And let me tell you what, I was huffing and freaking puffing the whole way back and for like 15 minutes after. And I'm like, I'm getting too old.
Pure rage. Pure rage. Yeah. Oh, I've been there. I've definitely run after puppies that have been blowing me off where the only reason I caught them is it was downhill.
Yeah, and then you're like, am I actually 30? Because I feel like I'm 50 right now.
Right. Yeah. But I think at this point we're pissing off the few 60 and 70 year olds who actually have something to complain about here, listening to two
Honestly
30-somethings complain about getting old. But all right, Becky. Well, this was a ton of fun. A little bit sad, but fun. And yeah, I'm sorry to hear about the loss of your gal. That's a bummer. That's a bummer. Not unexpected.
Thanks.
It's still a bummer.
Yeah, same to you. And oof, 2 in a day. That's tough.
Yeah, that was a bummer. that was a little bit like went down and got the one. She had like a mammary tumor that we'd been keeping an eye on. We'd had a couple of them removed and they just kind of kept growing back. We've been keeping an eye on it and it got really, really big in about a week and then like ruptured. So it was like, oh, okay, well I need to, that's it. You know, that's the end of the road. And like while I was down there grabbing her, my other old dog who was 15, like was trying to come out of the house. It was rainy, it was cold, it was gross, and just like trying to come out of the house to see what was going on. And I'm like I waited for him, and it took him such an absurd amount of time to get out of the house. It was like, okay, I think you're gonna come along here, pal.
Oof.
Yeah, no, it was a bummer.
You know, that's tough. And we always do something where we bury them with something to kind of take with them. And so like the dog we had that got killed on the mountain the other day, I don't know, early last year, I don't know how many pairs of sunglasses, of aviators that dog crunched. I mean, that was his thing. Cleve would set him down and he'd take off and they'd just be mangled, look like a pickup run over. So he got buried with a pair of sunglasses. And
Good.
This old dog that we just lost the other day, I could turn her loose and left her loose all the time, except she eats everything and is horrible about trash. If our trash had put up, she'd trot the mile to the neighbors and be like, I bet Gary and Sarah have something I can get into. So we buried her with a snack and like a little cheese stick wrapper of trash. It's little things like that, the little
ceremonies.
I don't know, little habits you have.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally. I get it.
Bring a little joy to the pain.
Absolutely.
But
have a little chuckle. The old Irish wake. Chuckle and a whiskey.
Yeah. Pretty much.
Good. Well, Becky, it's always a pleasure. Appreciate you coming on again.
Same for sure. I always enjoy your perspective.
Yeah. It's good talking to you. But let's do it again.
Absolutely.
Man, I love that sound.